Welcome back to the Joe Walsh Show. We start with this. No, we should never pledge 100% loyalty to our intelligence community, but we should always go after hostile foreign leaders. Then looks like California may not be breaking up after all. And finally, our gallery of the stupid: James Comey, Barack Obama, and a few silly blue states. But we begin with this issue of our intelligence community on one side, Putin on the other side, and the president in the middle. Really happy to be joined by Scott Uehlinger, a former CIA officer. Scott, welcome. Let me start with this. I've been bothered from the very beginning by this sometimes overt, sometimes covert attack on our men and women at the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department, the so-called deep state. It just seems to me like it's dominated way too much our conversation when it comes to this Russia thing. Start there, and I know that's really broad. What's your take on all of that?
Well, I think part of the, speaking specifically about perhaps some of President Trump's misstatements. He had some poor choices of words in his at the end of the summit with Putin. But I think a lot of that comes from sometimes a confusion on his part between the basically Russian interference in our election, which happened, however, was very ineffective and has traditionally happened and was also traditionally ineffective. A confusion between that and then his as a person, his extreme discomfort with the idea of the Russian collusion lie, which also is in fact a lie. And so he sometimes gets those mixed up in his emotion. And so I think in this case, it caused him to choose words poorly. Now, the intelligence community is not 100% right about everything all the time. That's for sure. However, and in the name of diplomacy, you certainly don't want to call the man who's 3 feet on your left the point of diplomacy to travel ahead to insult somebody. So you don't want to do that either. But he did choose his words poorly. And so, and that's unfortunate. So it has the feathers of a lot of people ruffled in the mainstream media and even some in the intelligence community. But the important thing to remember really is that regardless of the relations between these two world leaders, the intelligence war continues. I was a CIA station chief. I worked against the Russian target my entire life. And I'll tell you what, during the Obama reset period, which anyone who knew Russia, and I know Russia, I'm a Russian speaker, it was a disaster. But that didn't prevent me from going out all of the time and continuing to try to recruit Russians. So it's the same thing now. Regardless of what is said or not said at a press conference, the work of our intelligence service continues. And good intelligence officers are not going to let a few misstatements take their eyes off the ball.
Scott, when you saw Putin and Trump together, I mean, Putin's a ruthless.
Are more similar than any other. Putin's similarities with President Trump he has more commonalities with him than he does with any other European leader that I can think of, because both of them came from humble backgrounds. They didn't go to the right schools, and they're not products of the École Nationale, like the French president, places like this. These are regular guys who are used to the rough and tumble world. One New York real estate, one intelligence abroad and politics. So they both have, there's a certain amount of commonalities there, and there's a certain amount of personality similarities as well. But I think that probably behind closed doors, Trump was more firm with Putin on the subject of, for instance, election interference. But he certainly wasn't going to say in front of the world press and go out and call Putin a liar, even though he knows that Putin's obvious statements about absolutely nothing to do with U.S. election interference are falsehoods. I wouldn't have done it either, and I spent many years negotiating with Russians.
Yeah, it's interesting, Scott, and I love to pick your brain on this because you have such expertise. When the president was asked that question, in essence, who do you believe, your own intelligence people or Putin? How would you have advised the president to answer that?
That's a good question. I would not have liked that question, okay? And I think I would have basically dodged it. And I'm not the kind of person who likes to dodge things. I like to face things head on. But when you're in a diplomatic action with a Russian, I don't want to call him a liar. And I almost don't want, and I'd say, well, I always, it has always proved its worth to me for my administration, and I will continue to trust them. I'd say something like that. And then I would also say, what we're interested right now in doing is turning a page on our relations. In other words, kind of hedging that and kind of dodging that question. And that's the other thing to remember is that we have a very contentious press. And do a mental thought experiment. Go back to 1986, the Reykjavik summit, or 87, and imagine a U.S. member of the press throwing a grenade like that at Ronald Reagan with Gorbachev right beside him. It would never have happened. But this press, which is so determined to get rid of Trump and is even willing to risk a breakdown in Russian-American relations to get what they want, is willing to throw that grenade. And that's really unfortunate.
Hey, Scott, this notion that I know you've heard, and it's talked about on conservative talk radio and TV, this notion of the deep state, and people throw it around pretty cavalierly. In your mind, what does that mean? What is that?
It's a very good question, Joe. The deep state does exist. I discuss it sometimes on Newsmax.com. I have a blog I write often on, and it does exist. But I don't want everyone to think it's not something out of a James Bond movie with men around a table. But it's basically a large number of individuals who think alike and have similar, let's say, life goals. They have similar educational backgrounds. I think Peter Strzok's testimony was, he is the embodiment of that type of entitled mentality. Like when I saw him, I mean, that turned my stomach. But I've met many people like that. And in my I had an 18-year CIA career. I retired from the CIA. But I've met a lot of people like that, people who've never done anything in their life but be in the FBI or the CIA. I had other careers. I was a naval officer. I was a merchant marine officer. So it was an important job for me. But my whole identity was not wrapped in it. The way you can see people in Washington, their entire identity is wrapped in one job title. And so anything that threatens that, they lash out at, or they have contempt for people that are not like themselves. And he is the perfect embodiment of it. And there are a lot of people like that in government, unfortunately, for us. They have similar, the liberalization of our education system. They have similar worldviews. And a lot of the traditional values of a lot of Americans, like the viewers who are watching us tonight, they look at, Strzok made the comment, I can smell them in Walmart. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but it's typical of what you often hear in Washington.
Well, and Scott, last question for you. The other thing I found just revolting in Peter Strzok's testimony was when he said he wasn't biased. Clearly he had bias. I mean, his bias was off the charts, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the way in which he delivered that, I mean, it's unimaginable to me to ever have met someone like this. I'm sure I would have been as disgusted with him in person. The one bright ray of sunshine in all this is that Lisa Page is due to testify. And apparently they say, at least online, that there are some indications that she is going to be a little bit more candid than Mr. Strzok, which should make him pretty nervous. Because for him to say that he is not biased with these unbelievably offensive tweets is an insult to every American, and particularly Americans who have had similar work in the FBI or CIA.
Scott Uehlinger, everybody. Scott, I so appreciate it, man. I could listen to you all night. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks a lot. Look forward to you next time.
The will of the people of California thwarted. I'll have that story for you next.